Today, I'm speaking with Jonathan Winbush, a motion graphic artist who creates 360-degree motion graphics. So let's get to it. You are listening to the How to Create VR podcast, weekly conversations with VR professional creators, designers, and producers. Today, my guest is Jonathan Winbush, a motion graphics artist whose work can be seen on high-profile properties and studios such as Marvel, DC Comics, Warner Brothers, Hasbro, Happy Madison, Discovery Channel, and many more. Jonathan's big focus now is on creating motion graphic projects in VR and 360-degree video. Jonathan, welcome to my podcast.
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for having me on again.
Good, how are you?
Good.
I know you've been recovering from some sort of cold, right?
Yeah. Maybe like a week ago when we first had talked, I had a sore throat. It took everything out of me. Felt a little bit fatigued and everything.
Well, you're sounding good right now, so.
Yeah, can't complain.
I know. So the focus today is on motion graphics and 360-degree video. So why don't we start out with you telling us a little bit about your background and how you got into 360?
Yeah, so like you said, originally I started in motion graphics. Well, I'm still in motion graphics, but that's how everything started. You know, I went to the Art Institute of Pittsburgh, got my bachelor's degree in visual effects and motion graphics, and then came out, got an internship under Adam Sandler, worked under him for a few years at Happy Madison doing all the Blu-ray menus and main titles for his movies. And then from there, freelanced around until I landed at Warner Brothers, worked there for a few years. And then, just when you're doing the same stuff every day, you're kind of looking for a new challenge. And that's kind of how I fell into the whole VR thing, because I had a friend that was working at Oculus at the time, and he kind of invited me over. I think it was around the DK2 era, right when the DK2 came out. So I went over to Oculus when they were in Irvine, checked out what they were working on, and just was mind-blowing. And since then, I was just trying to figure out a way how to incorporate my skill set with VR.
And you got bit by the bug, by the 360 and VR bug.
Yeah, because at first everybody kept saying it was only for game programmers and game engines only did it, but I felt like that was kind of weird. I'm like, why can't storytellers and videographers use the same type of technology? Because end of the day, it's still a screen. And so that's when I just did a lot of research. There wasn't a lot of information out there, so I just kind of jumped in and just started hacking away at trying to come up with techniques to create video in 360.
So what is it about 360 and VR that attracts you? I mean, obviously you said you wanted to look for something new, but taking that aside, what is it that attracted you and most importantly keeps you there?
Well, I mean, I love technology. Everything that pushes the envelope forward, I'm all about. But the thing, to be honest, that really got me attracted to it was when everybody said I couldn't do it. Like a lot of my peers in the motion graphics business are like, oh, that's only for games. Why would you even want to try something like that? It's ridiculous. So I kind of took that as like a personal challenge. And then when I linked up with Tony and Mixmaster Mike, they had the same vision that I had, like, hey, let's just try to push this envelope. So that's when we came out and we banged our heads together and just created the magma chamber. From there, it's just been full speed ahead.
Right. So the fact that it's untested waters and basically the sky is the limit, that's what's keeping you in 360.
Everything is still the Wild West when it comes to VR.
Right.
Like, there's no real workflow yet. I mean, they're still kind of developing everything. So basically, it's just a lot of figuring out, and I love problem solving. So that's kind of what's keeping me intrigued.
Yeah, that makes sense. So there's a lot of acronyms and words being thrown out: VR, AR, MR, 360 video. Maybe you can just really quickly, what are the differences between all those letters there?
You know, at first it was all VR, AR, which VR is virtual reality, and then AR is augmented reality, which I know everybody's familiar with Pokemon Go. So that would be your introduction into AR, basically taking your real environment and adding CG elements to it, whether it's holograms or, any type of thing that's not really there in space that you have to have a screen up the view. Microsoft this past year threw in MR, which stands for mixed reality, which is causing a lot of confusion because I'm not sure if you tried their headsets, but they're basically VR headsets. I don't know if it's just a branding thing, because I mean, you would think mixed reality would go along with AR,
right?
But yeah, I mean, it's totally weird right now.
So with MR, they're meaning VR, not AR.
That's what it seems like to me. Like I've checked out their MR headsets, and it's just VR pretty much.
Right. So AR is, like you mentioned, it's augmented reality, adding CG elements to your real world. What about VR?
So VR, you're completely immersed. With AR, you're still in your living room or you're outside. In VR, you could take somebody all the way to Mars, like NASA did a lot of photogrammetry work where they took stills of Mars in 360 and then created a CG world and actually take you to Mars. So with VR, it's more like the sky's the limit, and whatever you could think of, you could create. With AR, you're kind of limited to your environment that you're in.
Got it. So it's truly virtual, 100% virtual. It's kind of like the holodeck of Star Trek.
Exactly, yeah.
And then finally, we have 360-degree video, which a lot of people call VR, but obviously that is not VR. It's just 360 video. So explain a little bit about that.
I know that's a hot debate within the community between 360 and VR. I still consider 360 VR because, VR means virtual reality. And when you have a headset on, you're in another reality. So I still look at it as virtual reality, but it's just another category of VR. Like how you have music, you have different genres of music, movies, you have different genres of movies. I say with VR, why can't there be different genres of VR?
That makes sense.
I still think it's under the same umbrella. 360 video, the technology is advancing. I'm not sure if you've seen the 6DOF stuff that Facebook and Oculus have recently announced this year, where you can actually take your depth of field maps and create almost like a room scale experience within your 360 video. Of course, it's still kind of limited because it is footage, but it still gives you the liberty to move around. So you could duck behind objects, you can move left, move right. It gives you a little bit more immersion within your video experience.
Let's explain that a little bit more, because in 360 video, basically it's a sphere and you're in the middle of it, and the only thing you can do really is spin around 360 degrees up, down, right, left, but you cannot move forward or backwards.
Correct.
What you're talking about is adding that depth where not only can you spin around, but now you're moving around the room within certain limits.
Yes, so it's almost like an optical illusion. So they could take the depth map and they can allow you to move around in room scale, but if you move too far to the left, too far forward, you start to see the pixels stretch, and that's just because you're not truly in a virtual environment as if you did it like in the game engine, but it still adds that little bit of immersion that's currently missing from the 360 video that I think people want.
Yeah, definitely. So do you think 360 video is going to replace flat video?
I don't think so, because everybody has a TV, everybody has computers, laptops, cell phones, and that's all flat. I think it would take a long time before you could convince everybody to wear headsets all the time. There's still that thing with VR that you have a bunch of wires hanging out the back from you, and that's for like a real good VR experience. They do have the mobile versions, but the resolution on those aren't as good, at least yet. So I still think there's a long way to go before you see VR take over the flat screen medium.
So do you see 360 as a great way for narrative? And we're going to jump into e-learning because that's where I see the future of 360 and fully immersion for e-learning. But do you see it as a good narrative? Obviously, you're making music videos with it, which I think that's a perfect genre for 360. It makes total sense in my mind.
Right.
What about a 2-hour movie? Like I just watched Hacksaw Ridge, and I don't know if I could put goggles and watch that for 2 hours.
For watching videos, I have a hard time watching really long. That's why we kind of tend to keep our videos between like 3 to 5 minutes, because we found that that's kind of the attention span people have for 360 videos. I know there's a couple of videos that were released this year and last year that tried to push those boundaries. I couldn't sit all the way through them, but it's different for like an interactive experience, like playing games for like an hour at a time. But if you just throw like a video on, it's kind of like you're just a spectator. So after a while, you get bored. So at the end of the day, I think it all depends on the content as well. Like I think if somebody did something really good in 360, like you're talking about e-learning, I always thought it would be good for schools to have 360 videos instead of reading textbook. It's like, why can't we take you to ancient Egypt, or why can't we take you to the Civil War and put the students in the middle of the action? I think that would be really impactful.
Right. Totally agree with you. I think full immersion with 360 in e-learning makes total sense, not just in schools and public schools, but universities and even in corporate training, right? Where, for example, when you're onboarding a new employee, maybe you can give them a tour of the entire place before they even show up to the place. So that way they know where to go, where the kitchen is, they know where HR is, right? And you can walk them through the entire building.
Yeah, I just talked to a real estate guy that he said that they're using VR to sell houses to people across seas. Like he said, they just sold a multi-million-dollar mansion to a guy in China because they sent out the VR set to him. He checked out the house in VR and he immediately bought it without even coming over here to check out the house.
So let's talk a little bit about motion graphics and how different is creating motion graphics for 360 in VR versus for flat video.
For 360 VR, especially with the way that we've been pushing it, it's completely different because you have to think of everything going on around you. Like when I'm working in TV or movies, it's kind of like, you have your flat palette, you know exactly what the viewer is going to be looking at. But when you're working at 360, you have no idea where the viewer is going to be looking. And so you have to try to keep stuff interesting at all times. There's no room for mistakes because, like if you don't have a good seam or if there's something popping, then that kind of takes you out of immersion. So it's just being aware of, everything going all around you at all times. And for that to happen, it takes a lot of processing power as well. Like now, a lot of this stuff, especially with AMD and Intel, they've been pushing the different video cards and the CPUs to really take advantage of that. But when you're working with 4K, 6K, 8K on a spherical format, it takes a lot of processing power. Sometimes you have to be forward thinking because you can't ramp preview right away. You kind of have to know what your vision is and do it and then render it out and check it out, which could be time consuming.
Right, which actually was going to lead me to my next question is about some techniques for improving rendering time. Because like you said, just rendering regular flat video, let's say 4K, can be a pain sometimes depending on the format, the codec, what effects you're using. Then you add 360 around that and you go 8K, let's say. What do you do for rendering time? Do you just go take a vacation and then come back?
Yeah, the one thing I learned when we were working on the magma chamber video was, because I'm used to working with just all my layers stacked, all my effects and everything, and then I just render everything out at the end of the day. But with 360, I was finding that sometimes the render queue would come up and say 36 hours rendering, and I'm like, I can't do that.
Right.
I can't have my machine down for that long. So one of the things I was doing was kind of flattening my layers, so if I had a plugin, say Particular, which does particle effects, and particle effects sometimes take a long time to render. So I would take just that layer, render it as a PNG sequence, and then bring that back into my composite, and then that eliminates a lot of that rendering.
For that one, right.
Yeah, so you just have to be smart about your layers and do a lot of pre-comping and a lot of pre-rendering. And then at the end of the day, that takes a lot of the pressure off of your CPU or GPU, and you get a lot more manageable render times.
Yeah, that makes sense. So when planning a 360 video project, what are your top 5 considerations, things that we should be aware of?
Well, the way that I work, we like to mix the techniques. We'll shoot our characters on green screen, like on traditional flat green screen at 6K, 8K, 60 frames per second if we could do that. And then we bring that into a full CG environment, which I build in Cinema 4D. So I haven't really had to worry about the stitching problems that a lot of people that are shooting on 360 cameras have to worry about, because my environments are already built in full CG, so there's no stitching involved. It's just about rendering it at that point.
That makes sense. So you're building the 360 environment and putting in flat video inside of it.
Right. From my aspect, you would just have to think about, it's easy when you have a locked off shot, but with our second video, the moon base, everything was moving. And so right now, you can't really take your camera data from your 3D program like 3D Max or Cinema 4D and then import that camera data into After Effects because it doesn't translate, at least of right now. So you might have to do a lot of camera tracking, or you might just have to match your environments by eye. So that's just something to take into consideration.
Right. Well, and we've been throwing the word stitching, and for those that are not familiar with 360 video, maybe really quickly explain what that process means.
Yeah. So if you ever seen the different 360 cameras, they have a bunch of lenses around them. Or if you use a GoPro rig, you have several GoPros combined in almost like a spherical shape. And what that's doing is shooting video in a spherical form, but every lens is going to have a little bit of difference on them. So whether it's the exposure or, just the lighting that's hitting that lens. And so when you bring it into your program like Premiere or After Effects, you're going to see a seam where the different camera lenses are intersecting. And so what you're doing is you have to stitch those seams together. Maybe you have to feather them out or do what you have to do to kind of make it all look cohesive.
Right, and that introduces a lot of other issues. Like you mentioned, exposure. One may be exposed a little bit different than the other. Your lighting may be different. Color correcting may be different. So even before you get into post, right, into editing and bringing it into your 3D environment, you have to do cleanup, basically. You have to stitch and then do a lot of cleanup, right?
Yeah, and that's if you have a locked off shot. Like if you have a moving shot,
good luck.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what's your take on e-learning and 360? I mean, you kind of touched a little about it, but do you want to expand a bit more? I mean, like for corporate training and other things, do you think there's a future in that?
I definitely do. I think this type of technology is definitely good for the whole gamut of different businesses, not just in the technology realm, but like if you have somebody working, say in like the sewer systems, you can kind of take them there without taking them there.
Right.
So it gives you the liberty to take people to the places that they need to know about and let them learn about it ahead of time so that when they do get to that environment, they're already familiar with it.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. What's your take on VR, 360, and AR, let's say 5 years from now? Where do you see the industry going?
I see everything going completely interactive. Like right now, Unity has been a big component for a 360 video. And so you can actually take your 360 video into the Unity game engine and add interactive elements to it to give the people that extra mile of immersion. So I can't even imagine what they're going to be able to do with that when they incorporate 6DOF a couple of years from now and just completely transport the people into the environments that they want to be in. And so I could say in 5 years, hopefully, I'm hoping that you won't even be able to tell like reality from virtual reality. It's almost like a blur when you put the headset on. And then with AR, I think the sky's the limit with AR, especially with the stuff they're doing now. I've seen them doing with NASA, you know, how they're interacting with the astronauts on the International Space Station. It's like they have the HoloLens on the space station so the people on the ground here can see what they're seeing and they're interacting and, you know, they're going over the different instruments. I know Elon Musk is talking about building a moon base for real, like on the moon. So if we have the HoloLens here in AR and then people on the moon have the HoloLens, it's almost like they can interact with each other being billions of miles away from each other and it makes them look like they're in the same room.
Right. Yeah. That sounds like a really cool future.
Yeah, almost Star Trek-ish.
Love it, man. I love it. Well, Jonathan, unfortunately, we're completely out of time. I really appreciate you being on my podcast today. It was really nice speaking with you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you again for having me on.
So if people want to get a hold of you, do you want to give an email or URL?
Yeah, so my email is jonathanwinbush@gmail.com. Feel free to reach out with any questions you have. I'm usually online all day, so if you're on Google Chat, just hit me up. And then if you want to get to my website, it's winbush.tv. And then social media is just Jonathan Winbush across the gamut.
Awesome. Well, make sure everybody go check out Jonathan's stuff. And Jonathan, thank you very much for being here. And to the rest of you, I'm glad you were here with me. And remember to subscribe and leave a review. So until the next episode, I'm your host, Marcelo Lewin. Cheers, everyone.